I'm very excited to speak at the conference. I've heard many good things about it over the years, so I'm happy to finally be able to participate in it. So today, as Lola mentioned, one of my interests is crowdsourcing, and I thought it might be of interest to you too. How many of you are actually translators? Okay, I wasn't sure because a lot of the talks have been on interpreting and many of you were participating, so I thought, oh my gosh, maybe there's a whole group of interpreters and they're not really interested in crowdsourced translation at all. So what I wanted to do was to talk about some of the sort of the pros and the cons on both the professional side and to offer you a little bit of the research to maybe give some weight to one side or the other. But judging from what I heard during the ethics debate, I think I already know where most of you lie in this debate, but I'm hoping that maybe I can offer some arguments both ways, so you could possibly think that crowdsourcing isn't necessarily as terrible to the profession as some people have suggested. And I thought I might begin by asking you what you think crowdsourcing is before I get into some definitions that I had. Has anyone heard of crowdsourcing, or if you have heard of it, what is it that you think of when you think of the term? Any hands? Yeah.
Basically, lay people translating, users of a service, translating into different national versions.
Yeah, so that's definitely, actually I'll go with the definition that I prefer, but it's definitely along those lines, where you open up translation to the general public. And this is as I said, there's a number of different definitions, but this is the one that I like, and I like it for a number of reasons. One is because it doesn't specify that the people who are doing the translation are necessarily not professional translators. It's important to keep in mind that when you open it up to lay people, or when you open translation up to the general public or to your users if you're a company, that's a lot of the people who are going to participate in the project might have no professional experience in translation whatsoever, but sometimes professional translators participate in these kinds of activities as well. And I'll show you some examples of how professionals participate. I also like the fact that this definition doesn't mention that crowdsourcers are not necessarily financially remunerated for their work. And one of the reasons why I like that is because some of the models will actually try to provide financial compensation for the participants. But what they usually do, in contrast to traditional translation, where usually you're paid a fairly generous amount per word or an hourly rate. Here we would be looking at things like micropayments. So you might be paid, say, a few cents to translate a sentence, and then someone else might be paid a few cents to rank five translations. And someone else might be paid a few cents to revise the translations or to pick their favorite out of the list. So it does sometimes involve micropayments, but a lot of the times it doesn't involve any sort of financial compensation. And I'll look at other ways that participants are compensated in that case. So as I said, Mindy Cohagen offered this definition. She talks about it being undertaken by unspecified self-selected individuals, meaning that when a company launches a crowdsourced translation initiative, they put out basically an open call on their website saying, if you're interested in participating, why not translate a sentence here, a sentence there, whenever you have a chance, and people are then able to choose and translate whatever interests them, in what language pairs they're interested in, given their background, whether they have, if they feel they have particular strengths in a given language pair, or if they have particular strengths in a given field of study, or if something just appeals to them in general. And in digital media spaces, meaning that these projects generally take place online. You don't find crowdsourced translation happening offline. We're usually talking about translating websites, but we could also be talking about other types of projects, and I'll give you some examples of those in a minute. One of the challenges to talking about crowdsourcing is that it also goes by a lot of other names. So you hear people talking about open translation, social translation, user-generated translation, community translation, collaborative translation, wiki translation, and sometimes people use all of these terms all together as well. But usually they're all talking about the same sort of thing, putting out a general call to the public rather than to a group of professional translators to have them volunteer to translate content. As I said, though, sometimes there are micropayments involved. I wanted to mention the fact that crowdsourcing can also take different forms. So these models, I didn't propose them myself. I took them from a report that was published in 2011. And they talked about 3 different models. So the first one that they wanted to talk about was product-driven models. And these usually involve a piece of open source, free or open source software projects. So things like Omega T or OpenOffice. And what happens here is that volunteers are participating to help create the software, and so volunteers then help participate to translate the software. So it's not one person localizing the entire piece of software, but it could be 1,000 volunteers, each contributing bits and pieces of it. They could also be translating the documentation, things to do with the websites, but it all focuses on a particular product. Cause-driven initiatives are initiatives that focus around an organization that has a not-for-profit mission. So you might find something like Wikipedia, which wants to create a free encyclopedia, the largest encyclopedia in history, and it's a not-for-profit initiative. The editors who participate in writing Wikipedia articles are not paid, and the people who volunteer to translate the Wikipedia articles are also not paid. Things like Global Voices Online, which is a community of more than 1,000 bloggers and translators from around the world who work to bring reports from blogs and citizen media, and so they try to translate blog entries as well. Again, the bloggers aren't paid, and neither are the translators. And in these kinds of projects, one particular translator might translate 250 words or 500 words at a time, and somebody else might translate something else. So it's a large initiative where not one person is translating all of the blog entries. Usually people are picking and choosing projects that interest them. Or something like the TED Open Translation Project. I'm sure most of you have heard of the TED Talks. Oh, okay, well, there are... Again, it's another not-for-profit mission to help spread ideas and to spread knowledge. These are talks by often very high-profile individuals, but often just people with incredibly interesting ideas, and they'll be talking for, they're fairly short. Some of the talks are about 10 minutes long. The speakers aren't paid, but they're trying to disseminate knowledge, trying to mobilize people around different kinds of ideas. And the reason why this ends up as a crowdsourcing model is because TED opened up their subtitling to the general public. They asked if anybody was interested in subtitling these TED Talks, which are available in English, into any language that they like. TED will provide a transcript of the talk, and then they have volunteers translating the talks. And they will have a second volunteer looking at the translation, and then they have the subtitles that will be added to the videos. And so when you're watching the videos, you're able to actually choose from a drop-down menu of different subtitles and have the subtitles appear on the videos. So those two first types of models, they don't usually generate too much contention around with professional translators. The last model is the one that often irks professional translators. And this is the case where a for-profit company decides that what they want to do is, instead of hiring a professional translation team, instead of turning to a translation agency, they're going to turn to the general public, generally to their users, to have them translate generally their website interface. So things like Facebook and Twitter, where they will basically turn to their users and say, you've helped make our product what it is, therefore you should help participate in making our product available in Spanish or German or French or whatever other language they would like to make it available in. They turn to the users. They'll often create an interface to go along with it, and there are still different models that are followed even when we're looking at an outsourcing-driven project as opposed to the cause-driven or the project-driven. So I'll show you some of the different things that distinguish the models. On the one hand, in some cases you have a number of barriers to entry. So even though it's open to the general public, it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody can participate equally. There are sometimes barriers. I'll show you some of those in a minute. Some of the models involve revision by professionals. Some of them involve no revision, and some of them involve revision by the participants. And usually various incentives are offered to the participants. As I mentioned, generally the participants are not financially remunerated, or if they are, they're offered very small micropayments that wouldn't allow them to make a living from this. But they are offered a number of other incentives, and some of these incentives, I think, could provide a model for the professional translation industry to actually build on. So barriers to entry, I split these up into linguistic barriers and technical barriers, and I have some examples on both sides of the fence. So this is an excerpt from TraduWiki, which is a crowdsourced initiative. And on the one hand, they have no linguistic barriers whatsoever. They have a paragraph that says, by saying anybody can translate it, we really mean it. We've split everything up into 2 sentences, or into very small chunks. The phrases are grouped together, they're short, they're easy to understand, so even if you don't master a language enough to use it, you can get the meaning of the phrases, and therefore you can translate. So as I said, this is on the one extreme, where basically they're saying, if you understand a language even to any tiny degree, you can translate into the other language. On the other hand, you have something like Twitter. Again, they haven't made this mandatory, but if you go to the translation center and you look, well, if you look close to the end over there, you'll see that they have a Learn option in their menu. When you click on the Learn option, they have a number of different translation lessons. They can help you familiarize yourself with the glossary, with the code, with the vocabulary and style, and they even have a section on translation techniques. The catch is that these aren't mandatory. If I wanted to go into Twitter Translation Center and I wanted to translate, I can start without actually having to go through any of this training. I assume the rationale for that was that if we make this seem too much like job training, people are probably not going to be interested in participating. What we really want to do is make it as easy as possible for people to participate. But at the same time, they do have some sort of tutorial set up to help people realize that translating is not just a matter of you type out whatever you want and it's going to be anything goes. There are some glossary terms that are actually set up. So they'll have a little quiz that says these are the following terms that we've accepted, and then over here in the quiz they say which is the correct translation for this term, which they just told you in the paragraph before, and you can flip through and finish the quiz. Technical barriers to entry. One of the things that happens with the very large projects like Twitter and Facebook is that the organizations that launch the Crowdsourcing initiative are very interested in breaking down the technical barriers, because again, if you put up too many barriers to having people participate, you're not going to be able to entice your users to help you translate these projects. So something like the Twitter Translation Center, you're able to go, when you first log in on the right-hand side over here, it shows you a list of what projects are still being undertaken. So they'll say, we're still looking for translations for this particular interface, for this particular section of the website, whereas these sections are already translated 100%, we don't need any more participants over there. And once you've gone to a section that still requires translation, you can see over there they have little arrows. You're able to flip through to the passages that are still being finalized. You're able to look through the contributions. You can vote on them just by clicking on the vote option. There is the blue hyperlink over there says edit translation. So if you want to go in and edit somebody else's translation, it's as easy as just clicking on the edit and making a correction. And you can actually go through and view all the translations that are available for a particular sentence. In some cases, these will range from very small things. You can see something like reset password, or there's a problem logging into your account. In other cases, they had a 500-word segment that they were looking for a translation of. And there were, I think, at least 100 different contributions to it that people were able to vote on and edit as well. So the idea is that the more votes a translation gets, the higher it moves up in the ranking, and that eventually, the idea is something that has the most votes would obviously be the most acceptable and the most problem-free, and that would be the translation that would be adopted. Okay, so this is, on the one hand, very few technical barriers to entry. On the other extreme, this is from the Open Office localization page. So you can see that in this case, they haven't actually broken down very many technical barriers. If you want to join and become a volunteer, you sign up for their mailing list. You get your language in the form of a tar.biz2 archive. You need to uncompress the archive. You use a special software 7-zip to do it, so you're going to have to download that. It has 276 files in a number of directories. You need to work on only those that have changed. You need to open all of them, edit it with PO Edit, which you can also download. And then once you're able to do that, you can mark your changes fuzzy using the cloud symbol, and then you can exchange it with them again. So all of that requires a lot of technical know-how. There's a lot of people who wouldn't be familiar with some of the requirements, and in addition, it requires a number of steps. You're going to be downloading software, you're going to be installing it on your hard drive, which you didn't have to do with something like the Twitter Translation Center. It's just a matter of going to the Translation Center with your Twitter account and saying, I would like to participate, you choose your language, and off you go. In terms of revision, in some cases the projects will have review by other participants. Sometimes these participants will be senior participants. In the case of TED, for instance, before a subtitle is actually matched up with the video, it has to be reviewed by a second volunteer. But there's no requirement that the second volunteer has to have any special training in translation. It's just a matter of a second person giving their opinion on it. In the case of Facebook, there is actually review by language professionals at the very end. So once a translation has been voted, there are some professional translators who've been hired to do some review at the back end, really. So they're not the visible translators, but they are working in the background. In other cases, for some projects, it's a little bit difficult to tell whether it's professional translators who are doing the reviewing or just other participants. I've looked at some of the calls, for instance, from Twitter on a Yahoo mailing group, and it looked as though they were looking for volunteer moderators who wouldn't actually necessarily have to have any professional translation training, but they would be the ones deciding on some of the final translation solutions. In terms of the incentives, as I mentioned, not a lot of financial incentive, but they do offer a number of other interesting incentives. TED, for instance, provides credit for work. Actually, most of them will provide very visible credit for the translators. So if you look, for instance, on the first screenshot that I have over there, that's for the TED Talks. For every talk that's been subtitled, you see that they have the red name at the top is the translator, and the red name underneath that is the reviewer. And if you click on the red link, you'll be taken to that translator and that reviewer's page where they can have a photo of themselves, they can list their experience and their training or their interests, basically whatever they would like to put on their profile page. And as I said, this happens for every talk. So for every translation that you've done, you get full credit for it, which often doesn't happen in professional circles. You'll see global voices as well. I've taken a shot over from there. That's the first person is the person who wrote the article, and the second person is the person who translated the article. And again, there's a hyperlink that goes back to that person's profile page where they can add a photo of themselves and as much information as they would like to add. Other incentives, this is from a project called WebFlakes, and this is actually fairly common to a lot of the projects like Twitter and Hootsuite. They'll provide things like badges. So after you've translated X number of words, you'll get a badge that says you're level 1 translator because you've translated so many words. You might also get a badge that says I'm a great French translator because I focused on the French section, or I've approved so many French translations, things like that. So the badges are those little circles down at the bottom. They've also listed, for instance, how many translations they've done, and they have things like shout-outs. So again, it depends on the project. A shout-out could be something as simple as, if you're in Facebook, it could be how many likes you got for your translations. If you're on Twitter, it could be how many votes you got for your translations. In this case, it's how many shout-outs, so how many approvals you got from other members of the community for your translations. WebFlakes also offers an interesting incentive that I haven't seen anywhere else. They will make a donation to charity for every I believe it's every 500 words that you produce, they will donate $1 to a charity, and 70 cents of that money will go to the charity of the translator's choice, and 30 cents of that will go to the charity of the reviewer's choice. I believe it's something like that. Sorry, I lost my note for that, but I know that they do donate $1 to charity for every 500 words. So you'll see underneath the profile, they said that X number of, $1,149 has been donated to a charity called Water, and of that, $81 was raised by this particular person. So on their profile page, it does show you how much money they've generated for the charity as well. So that's another incentive that does happen, but it's something that I think is particular to WebFlakes. I haven't seen other organizations making donations to charity based on the work that you've been doing. Other incentives that come up fairly frequently are things like leaderboards. So if you go to the homepage of the translation project, you might see the list of top contributors, which again will often take you to a link on their profile page, telling you that they've translated X number of words, or they've participated in X number of projects. So you might be wondering, why are organizations interested in crowdsourcing? Why are they asking people to translate their websites or to participate in their initiatives when these people don't really have often don't have any training in translation, and you don't really have any way of vetting their work if you're just going to let the reviewers, or sorry, the participants review one another's work. I have some quotes here, but before I get to them, I thought I might ask you what you think. Why do you think companies would be interested in the crowdsourcing model? Yeah?
Money for money to save money.
Okay, so this is definitely something that comes out from professional translators, and I'll talk about this in a minute. So the main argument from professional translators is crowdsourcers are trying to save money. They are trying to get something for free, and what they're really compromising on is quality. It of course doesn't come up when you look at quotes from the companies that engage in crowdsourcing, they don't mention the money. Now this could be because they don't want to talk about the fact that they might be exploiting workers, but the other argument is that it does cost a lot of money to create an interface. If you look at, for instance, Twitter's interface, to create an interface whereby the public can actively participate in translating, and instead of investing the money in a translation organization, you're investing the money in the IT development to create the platform. Their argument is often, our users are really engaged with the product, we want to find a new way to help them stay engaged. So for instance, if you look at this quote here, this is from Ethan Zuckerman, Global Voices Online. So this is a cause-driven initiative, it's a not-for-profit initiative. He says, the texts are translated by volunteers, the translations are extremely high quality because they're done by people who really care about the content. He also said that when he talked about this with the organizers of the TED conference, they were so impressed with what had happened at Global Voices Online that they decided to use the crowdsourcing model themselves. And initially what they did was they didn't want to launch the project and have no translations available. They didn't want to just say, we're interested in translations, but we don't have anything. So they hired some professional translators to subtitle a number of talks, so that when they first launched the project, they would already have some talks subtitled. And what they said was that when they compared the volunteer translations with the professional translations, they liked the volunteer translations better, even though the volunteers weren't necessarily professionals. This comes up over and over again. This is another quote from Baldur's Gate. So this is not a not-for-profit piece of software. It's a video game that was a for-profit video game, but it was localized into. Actually, sorry, I don't know what language it was localized into, but it was a crowdsourced fan translation. And in an interview, he gave his impression about it. He said, these are passionate fans, they know the ins and outs, they know the little details, and they're doing it because they love it. And the quality is so much higher. So as I said, this comes up over and over again. The fans know it, therefore it's got to be better than the professional translators. Even though you could certainly find a professional translator who's familiar with the video game and would therefore know it and have the professional training. But that never comes up in the quotes that you get from the crowdsourcers. I have another one over here from the engineering manager of Twitter. The volunteers are avid Twitter users. They understand the product before they translate the string. They tend to come up with good translations. Turnaround time is good. When we introduce a new feature, the volunteers respond quickly. And then he also argued that it was easier to support more languages when you can rely on volunteers, because you don't necessarily have to find a professional translator who can translate into Swahili. You can just open it up to your Swahili users and have them translate it for you. So clearly, I can see from your reactions, you're not going to have the same views as the crowdsourcers. I do have some quotes here from professional translators on both the pro and the con side, but I thought before I showed them to you, we could initiate a little bit of a discussion. So yes?
Are the only companies who are doing it, for example, the social networking and the social networking company, or would IBM, does IBM do it, or does General Motors do it?
Well, certainly the most common examples that you find are the social networking sites, but as I said, I did show you an example from the fan translation of Baldur's Gate as well, which is a video game, so it does get done outside of the social networking realm. What often happens is that it tends to be those social networking sites because you need a really engaged community of users who are going to be passionate enough about the product that they're going to be interested in translating it. If you don't have a connection between the company and the users, you're not going to find as many volunteers who are going to be interested.
I don't understand, because in fact, translation is not such an easy job. Why does anybody want to do it for free? I don't know if nothing else to do. And how do you know that it's effective? Because the people at Twitter don't necessarily speak Spanish or French or whatever it is, so how do they know?
And that's a really interesting question. This comes up all the time on the professional side, and I'll show you some of the reactions. Actually, sorry, these are the pro reactions, so I'll show those in just a minute. You'll often have people questioning, how can you possibly ensure quality when you're dealing with a number of people who don't know anything about translating, or who don't necessarily know anything about translating? The argument from the crowdsourcers, or from the companies that organize the crowdsourcing campaigns, is with this number of people, eventually somebody is going to catch a mistake, even though they don't necessarily have any training in translation. So if you have 1,000 people who are all looking at the same sentence and voting on it, eventually they're going to throw out the garbage translations, and all you're going to be left with is the good stuff. Oh, I see lots of hands. Okay, even though we don't.
That's the same argument as saying, let's put a disease or a problem online, and let's have anybody diagnose it. You don't have to be a doctor, and we'll pick the best diagnosis. That's ridiculous. That's popularity. That's not based on any knowledge. It's not based on any intellectual effort. That's really exploiting. And I don't think anybody would accept people doing diagnosis of a disease online, and yet because language is considered that everybody knows it, we accept that. And I just cannot, I don't really accept that it's a positive thing. It doesn't help the profession. It doesn't help to promote knowledge and language. Anyway.
Yeah.
Not only it doesn't promote, but actually it is destroying the profession. And I think that they are just praising volunteers just to justify that they are getting the job done free of charge. So that is outrageous. I'm really consternated by that kind of preference of volunteer translation rather than to use a professional translator.
Okay, and actually, sorry, I should ask the question, does it bother you as much when it's a not-for-profit initiative as it does when it's a for-profit initiative?
Yes.
I think that the arguments that you have quoted there, I know it's not your opinion, I hope, it's just a combination of greed and ignorance. Ignorance of how professional translation is done, and greed, because for example you mentioned Twitter as one of the culprits, and the Twitter IPO recently was so successful that their stock went up 10%, or 10 times actually, tenfold. So they can definitely afford to hire professional translators. I second the example, and I'll give another one. I'm very passionate, they mentioned the passion. I'm very passionate about music, I love music, okay? But that doesn't make me a musician. I couldn't sing to save my life, just as much as I like music. So it's the same with translation or with any other profession.
Yeah.
I argue, for example, you said Facebook, they have against certain, professional translators who check and revise again. But this one, it's like open source program. Like Microsoft, they always, they are a franchise and they sell their products. And then open source programmers from different parts of the world, they take part in writing another software. And it's free of charge for the public. But it's again a program. It's not like a disease. If you cannot diagnose, that's medicine, that's different things. But if there is something like certain text that it's for, they put it online and everybody comes and, step up to the plate or whatever you say, and it generates a lot of, views and ideas, and it's like brainstorming. We can't say that volunteers always, they are bad. You can find sometimes that there is a good translator somewhere in the world and they can contribute very well. But as long as there is another reviser behind the scene and they check and they say, okay, I agree, I don't disagree with this case. That's online you can do. And I have seen some in my own language, Farsi Dari, online there are good translations over there.
Okay. I think I'll go with the pros and the cons. I don't have a lot more time left, but I still have a lot more points I wanted to cover. There have been some professional translators who have weighed in on this and who have looked at translation as a possibly positive model, or that some aspects of it are positive. Naomi Bayer, for instance, suggests that it's a good way to have collaboration between professionals and amateurs. So for instance, if you look at the Facebook model where you do have professional translators reviewing the translations, you can have the non-professionals contributing, and it could possibly be a training ground for novices. So people who don't have a lot of experience in translation and who would be unable to define work, typically, because often what happens is that before a company wants to hire you, they often want you to have a few years of experience under your belt. Well, it is a way for novices to get some experience, and possibly for the professionals and the amateurs to collaborate together. There is an argument that it provides greater visibility for translator and for translation and for translators, because the argument has been that it alerts the general public that there is a need for translation, whereas the general public might not have been aware of it in the first place. I'll show you some reasons why I don't think that's necessarily the case. And